And so now, without further ado, I am going to introduce Lateefah Simon. There's probably very few people on this call who don't know who she is, but let me just make sure you do. Lateefah is the president of the Akhenaten Foundation, which is a philanthropic foundation. And she's been an advocate for civil rights and racial justice since she was barely out of middle school. She famously was the youngest woman at 19 to get a MacArthur Award. She was the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and for quite a long time, where she spearheaded some second chance reentry clinics. And then when Oscar Grant was killed, she was moved to run for the BART board. She joined the BART board. She became president of the BART board. She was just recently reelected to the BART board. When I first heard Lateefah speak, I thought, I would give so much to be able to speak like Lateefah Simon. And I can't. But lucky for you, Lateefah can speak like Lateefah Simon. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the woman who made Oprah's list of 25 civil rights leaders, Lateefah Simon.
Tila, what an honor. I'm sitting here and I'm shaking a little. I'm seeing the names of the members of the association who I know many of you all have looked up to, so many of you all, and this is an incredible time. One that actually should give us both pause, extreme excitement, but a time that pushes us to get ready for what's next. And, you know, Tila, I am so encouraged, not just by yesterday, but by today, this gathering of architects of today and tomorrow. And I know it wasn't just me, but that young woman, Amanda, yesterday gave us a charge to push up this hill, to climb up this next hill of justice. And as we all gather here today, I'm reminded not only of my now 20 plus years relationship with you, but I'm reminded when I was running a small organization in San Francisco, now called the Young Women's Freedom Center, still 25 years later, led by young women and girls who had been and who are dealing with the realities of being in the criminal and juvenile justice system and parenting in a very unfriendly city to poor people. There was a young attorney, and I believe she may be in this virtual gathering tonight, a young attorney who led an organization who I would watch on TV, almost it felt like weekly, daily on the Channel 2 News. Whenever there was a fight happening, whether it was in Washington, D.C. or on the streets of Oakland that demanded a civil rights institution step in, I would see Eva Patterson. And there was a day that this young lawyer who was running this organization decided to bring in a group of young activists. Many of you have heard this story, and venerable activists and attorneys from big firms and from civil rights firms together. Eva and I met in the hallway. I chased her down. And not only did I say that she was a star to me, but that I needed her help. The Center for Young Women's Development, the Young Women's Freedom Center, began working almost immediately with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And many of you are Skadden Fellow alums, so you know how difficult it is to get that fellowship. She had a Skadden Fellow who is now a judge, Rebecca Evanson. And she said, Lateefah, you can partner with Rebecca. Rebecca came into the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights to do welfare work, welfare law, welfare support work for folks who were facing prosecution for welfare fraud, and she wanted to do great things, but she was brought over to an organization run by girls who had spent much of their teenage years in cages. Through that work and through Eva's generosity and foresight, our organization became on the forefront of this battle for juvenile and criminal justice reform 20 years ago. One of the first things that we did together, and why this story is important as we lift and run up this hill to this next journey, I think about this story. because these girls who were running these organizing campaigns and doing workshops in juvenile hall around Know Your Rights, we knew that we had the power of experience. We knew we had the traditions that were at our backs. But what was required to move real justice wasn't just the story, wasn't just the righteousness. This nonprofit organization that was comprised of young women who wanted to see something different. We lacked tools. We didn't lack resiliency, but we lacked the component of the architecture that would help us win. Rebecca Evanson began coming into juvenile hall with us and sharing the stories that young women and girls who were arrested and incarcerated, mostly for drug crimes at the time, the ones who came in pregnant, there were no placements for them. She quickly learned that these girls, when they were giving birth, while incarcerated, taken to Highland Hospital to give birth, that they were shackled. We knew this, and we had considered this as just a norm of what it meant to be poor, young, and in a cage. Our first campaign win, because we were partnering with the Lawyers Committee and some of the firms that are on the call today, 13 girls literally from the hood who ran this organization, law firms and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights stopped that practice. And it was then, Tila, that I understood the ecosystem required to move justice. We went on to win many campaigns. When we learned that juvenile hall, and this is in the early 2000s in San Francisco, was placing young queer kids alone in solitary. We won that campaign to stop that practice, and you all helped us fire the ombudsman. Tila, there were thousands of calls I feel like I've fielded to you over the years of young families being evicted, young families facing incarceration, both through INS and the criminal system. Well, the hope is not just because we have a new administration, but in this moment in time, many of you have been working for decades together with groups on the ground and with this bar association and with civil rights organizations for an opportunity to organize and move both in the courts and on the streets in a different way. Well, those protest chants, many of them that you all have been a part of writing, those talking points, those aspirations, they are now becoming policy. And groups on the ground, families, individuals who seek this new form of justice, we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to be unbridled in what we know is right. My hope is as you move through tonight, you imagine, and this is not hyperbole, you all know, especially the attorneys who have fought some of these asylum cases and have freed families. You know families who, when they hear sirens, they go under the bed at night, hoping that law enforcement won't take them away. You know that there are families, regardless of the moratorium on evictions, are facing being homeless tomorrow. You know that the disparities in housing, the disparities in what's happening with education, displacement in our community, these are real realities that are facing families. Every day, essential workers, they go to work to field what is still the Bay Area, and they leave their children at home. There is equity everywhere, but more inequity that we have to fight to shift. My hope is that we understand that while we had a beautiful moment, the inauguration, and I worked under Kamala D. Harris for 5 years, and she is one of my dearest mentors. But Kamala told me this long time ago, politicians are not prophets, and they alone don't heal communities. As a mentor, she also told me that lawyers are architects along with real people who hold oppression on the backs of not only themselves, but of their grandmothers, that together we can forge new paths. I want us to push harder. There's a young man in the Bay Area. His name is Reverend Michael McBride. And I don't know if you know him, but he reminds us, many of us, as our young Martin. As a preacher who preaches at the intersection of justice and faith, he reminds me and many others, do the right thing to the point where you feel like you might lose your job. push the boundaries of what is acceptable to what is deeply right. That we must move past a dream for equity and move closer to a reality of justice where little Black children are not just living, but they are celebrated. That our schools have parity, that the cages that we put people in who do wrong are not cages, instead opportunities for transformation and deep healing in communities. We have to figure out how folks who are living in tent cities all over the United States can too access the reality that they deeply deserve housing. For the hospitals that continue to be filled with folks who are sick, not only with this horrific pathogen, but for folks who seek treatment for the most basic of ailments, that they too are seen as human. Now, as lawyers, your jobs are large and complicated. But I end with this. As a non-attorney who ran a civil rights law firm, as a young woman who was a teen mom, as a person who was brought into this community as, again, part of an infrastructure and institution to help move along this thing that we call justice, not only do I believe in the power of the law, I sent my own baby, my firstborn baby, on this journey. Tila and Eva and my other friends will be happy to know that Amina, my firstborn, is in the top 5 of her class as a 1L at Howard University. I too want her to join what my mother would say, a coven of change makers. Be magic. Be magic. Justice, we haven't seen it. We haven't felt it. We don't know what it looks like. So to be people of faith, of magic, we can work together. Not only together, we can push harder so that those children that I spoke of are not just thought of as existing, but they are celebrated. That's what liberation looks like. Thank you so much for having me. I can't imagine being in a better place tonight. Thank you for your work.